The story of George and Martha Williams. What if one morning you woke up with millions of dollars in your bank account, but your body refused to let you enjoy even a single sunrise? What if wealth surrounded you, but health abandoned you? Would that money still feel valuable? Today's emotional story is about an elderly American couple who learned the hardest truth of life far too late. A truth that many people ignore until it's almost gone. Health is wealth. Before we begin, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below. Health is the real wealth. Now, let's begin. In the quiet suburban town of Brookfield, Connecticut, there stood a beautiful white mansion surrounded by tall maple trees. The house belonged to George Williams, a retired businessman, and his wife Martha Williams, a former school teacher. They were both in their late 70s. The house had everything: marble floors, antique furniture, a luxurious garden, 3 expensive cars in the garage, a swimming pool rarely used. But despite all this, the house felt silent, lonely, cold. One autumn morning, George slowly walked down the staircase, holding the railing tightly. His breathing was heavy. "George, are you okay?" Martha asked from the kitchen. George forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." But the truth was different. George had high blood pressure, diabetes, and severe heart problems. Years of stress, late nights, and unhealthy food had taken their toll. He sat on the couch and sighed. "Strange," he murmured. "What?" Martha asked. George looked around the mansion. "We worked our whole lives for this house, but now, climbing the stairs feels like climbing a mountain." Martha didn't respond immediately. She simply placed 2 cups of tea on the table. Her eyes carried a quiet sadness, because she knew George was right. 30 years earlier, George Williams had been one of the most ambitious businessmen in New York. His company specialized in construction and real estate development. He worked 16 hours a day. Sleep optional. Exercise never. Healthy food impossible. His favorite meals were burgers, pizza, fried chicken, coffee after coffee. Arthur used to warn him, "George, you need to slow down." George would laugh. "Health can wait. Success can't." Those words sounded confident back then. Now, they sounded dangerous. One winter night in 1998, George experienced something terrifying. A sudden pain struck his chest. He collapsed on the living room floor. "Martha," he gasped. Martha rushed toward him. Her hands trembled. "George, what's happening?" "Chest pain." Within minutes, an ambulance arrived. The red lights flashed across the snowy street. At the hospital, the doctor spoke seriously. "Mr. Williams, you're extremely lucky." George frowned. "Lucky? You almost had a heart attack." The doctor leaned forward. "You must change your lifestyle." He handed George a list. "Exercise daily, eat healthy food, reduce stress, sleep properly." George nodded politely, but inside his mind, he thought, "I'll deal with it later." That later never came. Back in the present, George sat quietly in the garden. Autumn leaves fell gently around him. Martha joined him with 2 cups of tea. "Do you remember the doctor's warning?" she asked softly. George smiled weakly. "Yes, I ignored it." They sat in silence. The wind rustled the trees. After a moment, George whispered, "You know what I regret the most?" Martha looked at him. "What?" George's voice became heavy. "I spent my whole life earning money." He paused. "But I forgot to earn health." Martha gently held his hand. "George, we still have time." George looked at her with tired eyes. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was their grandson, Ethan, a 22-year-old college student studying sports science. Ethan walked into the house energetically. "Grandma, Grandpa." Martha smiled brightly. "Ethan, you're here." Ethan hugged them both tightly, but after a moment, his smile faded. "Grandpa, you looked tired." George chuckled. "That's what happens when you become old." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's what happens when you ignore your health." George raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really, Professor?" Ethan laughed. "Maybe not a professor yet, but I know something important." He leaned forward. "Your body is like a bank account." George frowned. "How?" Ethan explained. "When you exercise, eat healthy, and rest properly, you make deposits. But when you ignore health, you withdraw." George slowly nodded. "And what happens if the withdrawals continue?" he asked. Ethan replied quietly. "The account becomes empty." The next morning, Ethan made an unusual proposal. "Grandpa," he said, "let's start something new." George raised his eyebrows. What? A 30-day health challenge? George laughed loudly. At my age, yes, Ethan said confidently. Age doesn't matter. Habits do. Martha smiled. I like this idea. George sighed dramatically. So both of you are against me? Ethan grinned. No, we're saving you. George looked at them both. Then he slowly stood up. Fine. But if I collapse, I'm blaming you. Ethan laughed. Deal. The next morning at 6 a.m., Ethan knocked on George's bedroom door. Rise and shine. George groaned. This is torture. But he slowly put on his shoes. The morning air was cold. The sky was painted with soft pink colors. George took his first step onto the walking path. His legs felt heavy, that his breathing was uneven. After 5 minutes, he stopped. I can't do this. Ethan gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Yes, you can. George looked at the sunrise. For a moment, something inside him shifted. He whispered quietly, maybe health really is wealth. A few weeks later, something surprising happened. George felt different. His breathing improved. His energy increased. His doctor noticed the change. Mr. Williams, the doctor said with a smile, your blood pressure is improving. George couldn't believe it. On the drive home, he told Martha something emotional. You know what I realized? What? She asked. George smiled softly. All my life I chased money, but the real treasure was always inside my body. Martha's eyes filled with tears. You finally discovered it. One evening, George gathered his family. His children, his grandchildren. Everyone sat around the dining table. George stood up slowly. He spoke with deep emotion. I want to tell you something important. The room became quiet. George continued. I built companies, houses, and businesses. But the most valuable thing in life, he placed his hand over his heart, is health. Everyone listened carefully. George finished his sentence. Because without health, wealth means nothing. Years later, George and Martha became known in their town as the couple who inspired healthy living. Every morning they walked together in the park. Neighbors often joined them. George would always say the same line, protect your health today, so you can enjoy your wealth tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, remember this powerful truth. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy health. Take care of your body. Exercise. Eat wisely. Rest well. Because at the end of life, health is the real wealth. What if life gave you a second chance? Not to earn more money, not to build a bigger house, but simply to live better. After decades of ignoring his health, George Williams had finally started changing his life. Morning walks, healthy food. Less stress, more smiles. But life has a strange way of testing people who try to change. And soon, George and Martha would face a moment that would remind them just how fragile life really is. 6 months had passed since George began his health journey. The transformation was noticeable. George's steps were stronger. His breathing had improved. Even his laughter sounded younger. One peaceful morning in early spring, George and Martha walked through the neighborhood park. Birds chirped gently. The air smelled fresh after a night of rain. George looked around and smiled. Strange, he said. What? Martha asked. I've lived here for 20 years, and I never noticed how beautiful this park is. Martha chuckled softly. That's because you were always busy working. George nodded slowly. Maybe I spent too much time chasing things, and not enough time enjoying life. They sat on a wooden bench. Sunlight filtered through the trees. George took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he whispered, I feel alive. A week later, George had a routine checkup. Ethan drove him to the hospital. Inside the examination room, the doctor studied George's reports. He looked surprised. Mr. Williams, the doctor said, these numbers are improving. George smiled proudly. So, I'm not dying yet. The doctor laughed. No, but you were definitely heading in that direction before. He leaned forward. Your lifestyle changes are working. George looked at Ethan. Ethan gave a small victorious smile. Told you so, Grandpa. The doctor added one more sentence. But remember, health is like a garden. You must care for it every day. George nodded seriously. Understand now, but life wasn't perfect. Martha had been hiding something. For weeks she had been experiencing constant fatigue. She felt weak, sometimes dizzy, but she didn't want to worry George. After all, George had just begun improving. One evening, while washing dishes, Martha suddenly grabbed the counter. The room spun around her. George rushed toward her. "Martha," he held her before she collapsed. "What's wrong?" Martha forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But George's eyes were full of concern. "No, something isn't right." The next day they visited the hospital. After several tests, the doctor returned with a serious expression. George felt a cold wave of fear. "Doctor, what is it?" The doctor spoke carefully. "Martha has severe anemia and early heart complications." George's heart sank. "What?" the doctor continued. "She ignored her health for many years." George looked at Martha in shock. "You never told me?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "You were already struggling. I didn't want to add more worry." George held her hands tightly. "We should have faced, but despite all this, the house felt silent, lonely, cold. One autumn morning, George slowly walked down the staircase, holding the railing tightly. His breathing was heavy. "George, are you okay?" Martha asked from the kitchen. George forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." But the truth was different. George had high blood pressure, diabetes, and severe heart problems. Years of stress, late nights, and unhealthy food had taken their toll. He sat on the couch and sighed. "Strange," he murmured. "What?" Martha asked. George looked around the mansion.